I can think of worse places in the world to be exiled than the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea where John wrote the book of Revelation. Unspoiled beaches, picturesque sunsets, a spiritual and natural paradise, according to the tourism office. To get there today, you will need to take an overnight ferry from Athens, Greece, and reserve lodging in one of the small boutique hotels. You should plan to visit the Cave of the Apocalypse, where John received the vision from God, or one of the two monasteries on the island named for him. When I saw in the list of lectionary text assigned for today a passage from Revelation, I thought, that's interesting. And I was immediately drawn to the mystery of the last book of the New Testament. The book of Revelation is the strangest book in the Bible, writes scholar Elaine Pagels, and the most controversial. Although early Christians assumed the writer John was one of the 12 disciples and the author of the Gospel of John and the letters of John, most scholars now suggest that the book was completed a little later than that, probably around the end of the first century. Even if you've never read the book, because of its prominence in our religious and secular culture, you are familiar with some of the wild images it contains. Heavenly worship with flashes of lightning, rumbles of thunder, flaming torches, mighty angels, a red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, the woman of Babylon who drinks the blood of the saints, the final defeat of Satan, the Antichrist, and then finally, a vision of the New Jerusalem. Thomas Jefferson described Revelation as the ravings of a maniac. Some people have wondered what kind of mushrooms are grown on the island of Patmos. Martin Luther, of Protestant Reformation fame, in his 1522 introduction to the book, considered Revelation neither apostolic nor prophetic. And he could, and I quote, know how detect that the Holy Spirit produced it. The Eastern Orthodox Church recognizes it as a book of the New Testament, but they don't include it in their lectionary readings for worship. So when we responded a few minutes ago, this is the word of the Lord, thanks be to God, they would respond, I'm not so sure. I understand the complicated relationship we have with the book, and for very good reasons, but also think we can appreciate it and benefit from it without needing to figure out what this or that means, or when certain things related to the end of time will happen, all of that. Some people approach the book, as you know, as a mystery to be solved, a secret revealed. And they always seem to have the mystery solved with great confidence. It's as plain as day, they say. This means this, and that means that. Their interpretations are persuasive to many people and have the same kind of psychological attraction as a good conspiracy theory. A simple explanation that gives me a level of superiority because I have that knowledge and others don't. But as Pagels reminds us, this is war literature written by a refugee. The Jewish rebellion against Rome took place from the year 66 to 70. It started with the Jews expelling the Romans from Jerusalem, but it ended with the Romans sending 60,000 troops to destroy the city and the temple, starve the people, and carry thousands away as slaves. The historian Josephus detailed the destruction. He said the beautiful city was unrecognizable. Everything devastating and cruel that could happen as the result of war, that's what the Romans did. Maybe John was a witness to the destruction of Jerusalem. Perhaps he was a soldier who fought against the Romans. Or maybe he came along in the next generation and heard the stories, understood firsthand the damage the aftermath of war can bring to families and communities. And out of that context comes the growth of scattered Christian communities, themselves persecuted by the Romans as a minority, discriminated against, wondering when all of that violence would end, wondering how all of that violence would end. Trauma, trauma, trauma. So when you look at John's situation with that context in mind, the violence his vision contains is about what you'd expect from someone who has witnessed and experienced so much suffering. That's not the mushrooms talking. That's a person who's working through some serious pain and anger. And perhaps that's a part of what has drawn so many people to the book over the years, because if we admit it, if we are honest, there's nothing like seeing the people who have done us wrong get their full retribution and a little bit more. Remember what I just said about Martin Luther casting shade on the book of Revelation? Wouldn't even number it in his Bible and put it at the end of his translation. That was the year 1522. A decade or so later, he wrote another introduction, but this time he had a slightly more favorable view of Revelation, and he interpreted the Antichrist as the Pope and was convinced the end of the world was coming soon. But the Catholic Church felt the same way about Luther. One early Catholic biographer had an artist depict Martin Luther as the seven-headed beast of Revelation, as an illustration in his biography. So it's not surprising that people throughout history have always found their enemies as God's enemies. It's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. Every terrorist is someone else's freedom fighter. So yes, Revelation brings a lot of baggage with it, and the brutal violence toward enemies doesn't line up with the rest of the New Testament and Jesus' teachings. But if you can make it past the violence, if you can get some distance from the trauma and the anger, if you can just hold on, by the time you get to the end, the vision of the new heaven and the new earth unfolds. John states, death will be no more. Mourning and crying will be no more. No longer a city in ruins. In his vision, it is like a jewel. High, strong walls. The city is pure gold, transparent as glass. The gates will never shut by day because there's no threat, and there will be no night. The river of the water of life runs through it. Now, maybe this vision of the future helped John deal with the pain of the past and the present. It has certainly done that for people of faith for 2,000 years since he wrote those words. Now, of course, it is possible to be so heavenly minded that we are of no earthly good. And I admit that our evangelical tradition has often guided our attention upward because we didn't want to think about the challenges around us. But just like John, when we speak or pray or sing about the great reunion in the by and by, when we imagine the future, that can be a healthy way to heal from the pain of the present, or at least take a nice break from it. Imagine, for a moment, a group of enslaved Africans taken by force to work on plantations on a different continent, displaced from their homeland. Some were refugees, some were victims of war. Christianity is used in the relationship of power between master and those enslaved, but it also provides comfort, and the images and stories helped describe their hope for the future. The Exodus of the Old Testament looms large in their singing, but so does a new heaven and a new earth. A deep river, as you just heard in the middle of the anthem that the choir sang. Those words from a spiritual that states that just beyond the river is a new home. Now, those images had at least two meanings for those who were enslaved. When they sing about that new home, they are singing about freedom and present in the in the present as well as in eternity. And how powerful would that vision be of being reunited with loved ones, children, parents, brothers, sisters, families who had been broken apart because of the slave trade, literally sold down the river. Or imagine the generations of people who have sung the song, I Want to Be Ready, which is always followed in parentheses with the additional title, Walk in Jerusalem, and it has the refrain of just like John. Now, the author of the spiritual is unknown, although there's evidence that it was sung before the Civil War. In 1919, the Associated Press reported a concert by an African-American choir in Philadelphia, and I Want to Be Ready was the opening song. They sang as if the music lifted them above toil and travail to a dreaming vista of a promised land of opportunity without prejudice and discrimination. That song has verses like, John says the city was just 4 square, and then the response, but I'll meet my mother and father there. Walk in Jerusalem just like John. Black choirs have sung it. White choirs and quartets have sung it. Even Charlie Daniels, who had his own vision of the devil with a fiddle on a mission to Georgia, he sang it. Or imagine the late Murtis West of Center, Alabama, born on a farm in 1923 in Cherokee County, baptized at the age of 14 in Spring Creek, formal education to grade 8. During World War II, she prayed regularly for people like her husband, brothers, and friends who were serving in combat. She read the Bible straight through 4 times during the war and praised God when her husband and others returned safely. She had an inclination toward art and made a few things along the way to sell to help make ends meet. Then she taught herself to paint, which provided a creative outlet, but it also allowed her to focus her attention away from worry, and she had reason to worry. Her daughter, her only child, married a very angry and mean man, and when the daughter and son-in-law moved to Japan with the Air Force, Murtis had a real sense that something would happen to Martha Jane and the grandchildren. So to deal with her anxiety, she read the Bible, late at night, in the quiet hours. I saw revelation in flashes, she told interviewers, Ann Oppenheimer and Chuck Rosenack, and she painted the scenes from the book. She said, whether it was through my eyes, God's eyes, or St. John's eyes, I'm not sure. But the hand of God directed me to put it down. I can't remember how I drew them. I felt as if someone else held the brush while I painted them. She made 13 paintings in the Revelation series over the course of 7 years, which would eventually be discovered by art collectors and critics, and she's now remembered as one of the most important self-taught artists from the South. You keep the paintings on your mind instead of your troubles, she said in reflection. Her worst fears were realized when Martha Jane was murdered by her husband. She kept painting the visions God gave her, partly for herself, but also, she said, to inspire others to trust in God. Now, few of us will experience the displacement and suffering John experienced as a refugee from war, or we will probably not experience the destruction of everything that orders our lives. And compared to the plight of so many people from the past and the present, the challenges we face pale in comparison. But we do find ourselves on our own island of Patmos from time to time. Although there's no sandy shore, no comforting sunset, and no boutique hotel amenities, we're just there in our minds, exiled by others or exiled by self, forced to find a way back to the mainland, though it seems so far away. And just like John, we can find that we are not alone, but that God is present and has a word for us, a surprising message. Maybe not as detailed as John's revelation, and hopefully not filled with creative ways to smite our enemies, but a vision with a little light that moves us forward, step by step, into God's light and grace. Amen.